Hi, welcome to learnhowtogarden.com, and in today's episode of the 10 Minute Gardener we're going to be doing an update on the fruit garden we created a few months ago. What you're looking at now is the overview of the fruit garden. About 4 months ago this was still a horse paddock, and what I'm going to do now is walk you around and show you the soft fruit we planted, the trees we planted, talk you through one or two of the things that we should be doing with some of that fruit, and also show you the one or two disasters that we've had along the way. If you're not already subscribed to us at learnhowtogarden.com, there's a link directly above this film. Click on that, it'll take you to my website, input your email address, and I can let you know every single time I do an update and every single time I post a new film. Before we start to talk about the individual things we've planted and got growing in the garden, the first thing I want you to notice, which you probably can't help but notice, are that our currants and our Tayberries have got nets over them. If you don't net your soft fruit, you will lose all of it to birds. They will take all of the currants, they'll take all of your blackberries, raspberries, Tayberries, the whole lot will just go. And they'll normally take it the day before you think it's ready. These are really simple supports. They're just two pieces of cross bamboo, clove hitch knot on one, round and round with the rope to hold your support, and then a long piece of bamboo across the top with just some fine netting put over the top to keep the birds out. When you put that netting on, pin it down because you want it quite taut, otherwise you can get birds caught up in it, and that's a real shame because they'll just die, and we want to keep them out of the actual currants, we don't want to kill them. The first things we want to look at are the red and white currants we've got here, and what is great about these is we're going to get a really good crop off these the first year. When we look at a currant, the important thing to remember is we're trying to get an upturned goblet like your hand, so anything growing in the centre you need to take out. So when we look at this white currant, the obvious one is this one right in the centre, and come right down to the bottom and just remove it. And with the rest of them, what I tend to do is reduce each of the laterals back to about 5 leaves and just take them all off, and it's to open it up and to get a much more open bush. And white currants are quite difficult to tell when they're ready because obviously they don't change a lot of colour. These have probably got about a week to go, but as you can probably see, we've got a fantastic crop growing on here already. Here's another one that's crossing, and I'll just take that out, but I'll take that out once I've actually cropped the berries. And it's exactly the same with red currants. You're trying to get an upturned goblet, everything else you need to take out. And one of the easy things to do sometimes is to actually sort of just take off an entire branch with these, they're called sprigs of currants, which is a great word, and they all come off at the same time. Any that are obviously not going to grow particularly well, like these that are bending down, take off right back next to the plant. And you're pruning as much for shape as anything else. We're now with our black currants, and normally what I do with black currants is just take a third of the bush from the bottom, the very old stems. But because it's only the first year this is in, we're actually going to prune this very similar to the red and white currants, which is more for shape. So any branches that are crossing we'll take out and try and open up the centre. But we're getting a really nice crop of black currants. These are sort of quite large, they're really quite sweet, great straight off the bush. Remember, I'll just finish eating this one, they need water. All your currant bushes and your gooseberries need water, but you're better to drench them, really soak them, than dribble a bit on each time. So if it's dry, if you've had 2 or 3 days of very dry weather, really soak your black currants. And keep an eye out for pests and diseases on your black currants. They can suffer from 1 or 2 quite debilitating things. So the main thing to do is to look at how healthy your leaves look, and you're looking for really dark green healthy leaves. I won't go through the great list of things they can get. If you get problems with your black currants, just take a photo, email it to me at Learn How to Garden, and I'll tell you exactly what it's likely to be and how to treat it. Otherwise we'll spend the next hour talking about just the problems with black currants. We're now with our gooseberries, and we've got a real dichotomy here. We've got two which are absolutely laden with fruit. We've got our half standard and our Hinokamoni red. I can never pronounce it. It's the red one, and these are growing beautifully. Lots of fruit, very ready, or very close to being ready to pick. With gooseberries, when it comes to pruning them, again, first rule, any crossing branches, get those out so you've got airflow through the bush. And then the next thing you want to do is look at the new growth this season, and you want to take that back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leaves. So you do the whole bush and take it back to 5 leaves, and you'll do that throughout the whole bush. On a standard, the same as with black currants, if these are totally laden, sometimes you really do need to prop these up to hold them up, otherwise they'll actually bend down and break the actual branch off. You'll notice that I've had to replace the stake on this with a bigger stake. That's because of the amount of fruit that was on here. It was just bending the previous stake. The one disaster, the real disaster that we've had in the fruit garden is back here. And this, interestingly, is a gooseberry bush that's just dead. And we'll pull him out. And what was interesting is this was the one that I thought, when we planted it, would be the easiest to grow. It came in this coir pot. And I think what the problem is with the coir pot is that when we actually had some dry weather, I didn't soak it enough, and what happened is that the coir wicked the actual water away from the gooseberry, and it basically just killed it. So I'm not sure whether I'm a fan of the coir pots or not at the minute. The two bare rooted ones have been absolutely fantastic. So we'll need to replace this gooseberry later in the year. This was Invicta, which is a shame. It's one of my favourite sort of tasting ones. I'll probably go for another coir pot again just to see whether it was a one-off or whether there is a problem with it. But I would say if you use these coir pots, really do keep it well watered. While we're here, I'll just go through exactly the same on here. All the new growth we'll take back to 4 leaves. While we're talking about disasters, I'll show you the 2 disasters that I'm totally responsible for. This is the apple we're growing in a pot, and as you can see, it looks a bit sparse really. We're still okay in that we've got the main framework of branches that's going to come out to grow our dwarf pyramid, but it's not growing as well as you think. And behind me we have our quince that the last time you saw it, this had 3 beautiful main branches, and we now have a very tall central stem, and we're working on these branches coming out. That's because for any of you who watched the construction of this garden remember, it was an old paddock. It's an old pony paddock at the side of my allotment that I've taken over. There are still goats next door, and those goats got out one day and they decimated the quince and the 2 apple trees that are at the bottom. I'd like to have a go at the owner. Unfortunately, the goats belonged to me, so it's probably my fault. I would have thought at sort of 8, 9, 10, they're quite elderly goats, they would have got over jumping fences and eating trees, but obviously not. They will recover. That's the good thing about it. It's just that I can't show you much of an update on them as they've been eaten. These are our raspberries that are growing quite nicely. From here this way we've got our standard summer fruiting varieties. We'll get no fruit off these this year at all, but the canes that are growing will fruit really healthily and well next year. I'm not too concerned that we've got a couple of gaps that have appeared because of 1 or 2 of the canes that didn't take, because they will soon fill with these raspberries that are growing. Raspberries can suffer from rust, so keep an eye out. Classic little signs. It looks like little, well, brown patches of rust on the leaves. These are just a few of our prima cane or autumn flowering raspberries. They'll grow the cane this year and they'll produce fruit in the autumn for us this year. Of all the fruit we're growing, these are the shallowest rooted. Make sure you keep them watered. The reason you can see there's water sitting on the surface, we've had 3 or 4 days of very hot weather. I don't want these to dry out at all because they will stress quicker than anything. So if you've only got a small amount of water, water your cane fruit, your raspberries or your Tayberries, things like that. This is the Tayberry. if you remember, this has a bed all to itself. We may plant some lavender or rosemary along the edges eventually, or we might even plant some strawberries. It's the one thing I'm not growing. And this is producing fruit this year on the canes that it arrived with. Again, it fruits on canes that are year old. And what will happen long term is that all the canes that are growing this year, next year will be laid out along these wires to produce fruit. And as you can see, it produces wonderfully big, luscious red fruit. In fact, in a moment I'm going to pick one or two of these, pop them in some Greek yogurt, and that'll be my reward for doing this film. But we also are getting a lot of great new growth, and we will train this. Normally we'd bring it straight at the centre, and then next year it will be put out so that even more growth that comes next year, all the new growth goes in the centre. The old growth from this year is put out in a fan, and that's what produces these fantastic big berries. They're sort of longer than a raspberry in some ways, and I find their taste slightly more tart. I really quite like the Tayberries. That's all of the soft fruit. Again, very few problems. Don't be tempted to overfeed them. If you've prepared your ground well, they'll all be doing quite well. The last two things we have are just behind us, and there are plum trees. This is the Asian plum we planted, and this is looking really spectacular. It's growing really well. It seems to have settled really nicely into its position. No fruit this year, but I wouldn't expect that. In fact, if I got fruit this year, I'd be tempted to take it off just to let the plant really settle in. Again, keeping well staked, well watered. No pruning to do on this one, or the other plum tree, the Victoria at the far end. If you've planted cherries, and we do have a wall train cherry, try and prune your cherries in the summer. They do suffer from something called silver leaf disease, and what happens is the bacteria gets into where you've done the cut and goes down into the wood. And if you prune in the summer while the sap is still moving through the tree, that sap moving out stops the actual bacterial spores getting in. So if you've got to prune cherries, prune your cherries in the summer. The other thing you probably noticed is that we do have the flowers growing in the outside beds, the bright orange ones that you probably saw in one or two of the shots. That's a Californian poppy, that's a Schultzia. These wonderful things are sunflowers. These are all courtesy of Higgledy Garden, and I suspect when we do the next update these will all be absolutely banging flower. Other things that you need to be doing if you're growing melons, watch the melon film that we're about to put up, because you do need to pinch those out. Rhubarbs, we're now in the first week of July. Stop picking your rhubarb, really mulch it very well, let it build up energy for next year. That's what it needs to do. And the last but not least thing we need to do is just show you the apple tree in my mum's garden, the Espalier Apple, and show you how to choose the next two branches that will form the next tier of the Espalier. We're in my mum's garden against the fence, which probably needs replacing with a better one if we're going to grow this tree successfully. And if you look at this Espalier, we've got a tier growing here, a tier growing here. What we need to do is choose our third tier, and it's quite obvious on this one really that we're going to choose these two. They're about 2 feet apart and they're about in the right place. So those are going to be the next two branches that are going to form the third Espalier. We do need to prune this, but I'm going to do a separate film on summer pruning Espalier trees, purely so I can go through this in more detail. But it's just to show you that, you know, if you're looking at it, those are the two. I'll be doing this film in the next 5 days to show you how to actually prune a trained tree. Thanks a lot for watching Learn How to Garden. I hope you're enjoying this update on our fruit. Any questions you have, please drop me an email and I'll try to answer them.